Okay, Chapter 10, we're going to talk briefly about some investment planning strategies. So as we go through this chapter, again, this is just a cursory kind of a view, if you will, of investments in general. But we're going to work our way through and try to give you a little bit of an introduction. The major steps in investing are essentially, number one, identifying what a person's goals are. Combine that with what their risk tolerance is. Now that's usually the hard part, is to really try to identify and combine those two things. The next thing we need to do, obviously, is to talk about what are the client's preferences for investments. What assets are going to best meet their goals and their risk tolerance. Following that, we're going to look at and determine the weights, the investments that we'll make in those assets in their investment portfolio. And then, of course, over time, we're going to manipulate or reorganize that portfolio to match their needs as time passes. The difficulties with setting goals in general is really that goals are so fleeting. They come and go. They change over time. So as we go through different life cycle changes, our objectives are going to change. It's going to be difficult sometimes even verbalize what they are. We need to have a good understanding of diversification and asset allocation, and quite frankly, that's the part of investing that most people neglect. They don't really understand how that all works and how it should work. Certainly, we need to understand something about taxes and time. They are certainly critical in understanding, number one, our ability to get to a certain place, but also the amount that we'll actually end up with when we get there. An old saying is, it's not really how much you make, it's how much you keep that counts. So we need to understand how taxes are going to impact that. And of course, in the end, we're going to have to have some idea about expectations and what happens when expectations change over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a step out of the textbook and talk a little bit about these life cycles, right? Essentially, there are three of them. There's the accumulation stage, where we're obviously very young, starting to build our financial life. We'll talk about the acceleration piece, that as we get into our career and get into our really better money-making years, how our objectives change then. And then finally, we'll talk about preservation. When we get to retirement, what are the things that are going to concern us most there with respect to our objectives, etc. So this is something that's just referred to as the financial circle of life, right? And you can see that there are a variety of securities, investments, strategies that we'll employ that help us understand how our objectives change and how we can meet those objectives. So let's first look at just an overview. I mean, the things that we're going to primarily talk about are the first four things here. Term and life insurance. We're going to talk about investments, retirement planning, some wealth preservation. And certainly when we get to retirement, if not a little bit before, I'm thinking back here maybe in the 50s, is where we really should start with this planning for wealth transfer. We have to get things in place so that should something happen to us, we don't have to worry about any delays in transfer of assets, etc. So with respect to the accumulation stage, right, the very young age that we're at, right, if you're in your 20s to 30s, you're really thinking about these things, your job, you're starting a family, debt, right, buying that first home. All of those things are issues that we need to make sure we have some type of a plan to help us with throughout our whole life. Now, when we get to retirement, I mean, life insurance should not be the critical asset in our plan. I mean, it still could be important, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the most critical component. And certainly, we shouldn't put all of our eggs in the life insurance basket. What about investments, right? Starting at an early age, early 25 on, right? People are thinking about mortgages and education and expenses, saving for the future. Investments are going to play that key role in that ongoing accumulation of assets throughout our whole life. Now, of course, when do we start thinking about retirement? I mean, it would be nice if we could start thinking a little bit earlier. I mean, this has it, here's 55, 50, 45. I mean, this has us right around 35, 40. I mean, that's probably when we should really start really kicking into gear. But it would be nice if we could start a little bit earlier. And again, with most bigger corporations, some bigger companies that we might work with, that retirement planning can actually start much earlier and give us some ideas or some objectives to think about when we're young. But we need to start thinking about retirement. Are we going to be looking forward to it, right? Are we just running scared into that dark night trying to figure out what's going to happen, or just wait and see what happens? What about wealth preservation, right? Once you get to retirement, now we have to go into another mode. We actually have to go into more of a conservative mode. We have to think about our health, protecting our family. We need to start thinking about protecting those assets that we've accumulated over time. And of course, we have to be sure, or try to be sure, that the money's going to last as long as we can possibly get it to last. Again, at this time, our primary threat is outliving our money, living too long. And of course, wealth transfer really just talks about, once I pass, what are the things that I have in place so that assets move smoothly, with the minimum amount of hassle, and with the least amount of destruction to their value. In other words, we want to minimize any of the costs of our passing. We want to have some documents in place so that things can move smoothly. That's part one. We're going to move on to part two here with the next slides.